Wow. Welcome to the Wildscast, my friends. I just finished a ridiculously important conversation with a brilliant woman, Dr. Einat Wilf, who is a leading intellectual on matters of foreign policy. She was a member of the Israeli Knesset, and she's Israel's most articulate representative today on the international stage. She has a BA from Harvard, an MBA from the INSEAD in France, a PhD from Cambridge. But she just blew my mind away. She made such incredibly important points about the two-state solution. Please tune in and listen to the way she describes it, but she does not believe that the Palestinians were ever interested in having their own state, but that they were interested in the Jews not having theirs. I want you to keep an open mind and listen to what she has to say. She's got incredibly important historical perspective. I asked her also how she believes the Biden administration, because Biden, it seems like he's really pro-Israel, but he's been doing things that have been, calling for Israel's ceasefire, which has been very difficult in helping Israel to, finish this war against Hamas. I asked her about the Abraham Accords. Is that the only way forward with our Arab neighbors, and what to do about college campus? What's our attitude with our students on college campus? Do we empower them to fight back or encourage them to leave? Tune in to the Wildscast. Take a listen. Very, very significant for all Jews in the world to hear this, especially American Jews, in my opinion. Remember to subscribe and to comment. Welcome to the Wildscast. Okay, welcome to the Wildscast. I have the honor and the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Einat Wilf, who is a leading intellectual on foreign policy, economics, education in Israel, a former member of Knesset, someone who served as an intelligence officer. Welcome, Dr. Wilf. It's such an honor and pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Listen, you've been around the block in Israel. You've got a BA from Harvard in government, a PhD from Cambridge in political science. Tell me what you meant when you said the following in one of your articles. You stated, Zionism has allowed someone like me to preserve my faith in the sovereignty of human beings over their fate, while maintaining a deep and continuous commitment to the Jewish people and its future. Zionism won. I love that line. I read that quite a while ago. I want to hear what you have to say about that now, post October 7th. Is Zionism still winning?
Oh, first of all, time will tell. I mean, I read a while ago, there was a great piece that basically looked at the theology of Satmar Jews and basically talked about the fact that it's generally taught as a losing theology. But he was like, they're playing the long game. They might just have the last laugh. So, of course, in Jewish history, you can't assume anything is final, determined. I will just say it when I go to kind of the darkest thoughts after October 7th, and we've all had them. In many ways, we sometimes even fear to voice them, but let me voice them despite the fear. The possibility that, Sinwar's elation at being the new Salah ad-Din. We know the Palestinians and the Arabs in their understanding, and they call Israel the second Crusader state, in order to indicate that it will meet the same fate as the first. Sooner or later, it will be gone, and the region will revert to being Arab and Muslim, as it should be from their perspective, beginning in the 7th century. So the thing about the Crusader state is that the Muslims actually repeatedly, I mean, they consistently tried to bring her down until it was gone. So if we take the Arab and Palestinian kind of theology for a moment and assume they succeed, the difference between the Christian world and the Jewish world is that we tell a story where the Jews always find a way to somehow rebuild themselves. We hold up Yavne as an excellent example of Jewish revival, even in the face of the greatest destruction of the Second Temple. But a part of me wonders, if the third sovereignty of the Jewish people is really gone, will we recover from that? I mean, maybe the Satmar Jews will, but maybe they'll become the new Judaism. But in truth, like, will we be able to really recover from that? So that's kind of on the very dark side of the thought.
Well, do you have,
But
can I jump in on that? Do you
sure.
believe, I mean, look, I'm a rabbi, so I believe in the eternity of the Jewish people. It's promised in the Torah and throughout Tanakh. So even if Israel, God forbid, God forbid, God forbid, doesn't work out, the state, the sovereign political entity we call Israel, I still believe will continue to exist in the diaspora. But, you know, you are I guess, I don't want to call you a pure Zionist. You are someone I deeply respect in regard to that. But what would happen, God forbid, if there was no state of Israel? Would the Jewish people continue to not only exist, but to thrive as we have in the diaspora for 2,000 years before?
So I question that, because again, the establishment of the state of Israel is a dramatic story. It's not like the Jews being expelled from Spain and then some go to Morocco and some go to the Netherlands and ultimately they thrive there. It's like the creation of the state of Israel is a major event on par with, I would say even more than on par with the Second Temple, really almost the first.
Yeah.
So here I think the question is much more is at stake, because what does it mean to be Jewish if the third sovereignty fails? Like, how much faith can you ultimately keep? And will the only way to be Jewish will be essentially the Satmar one, the one that says that from the beginning there should not have been a Jewish state, and that's the only way you can keep your Jewish faith, because anything else will be dramatically questioned.
I'll just jump in. This is really interesting. I didn't actually expect our conversation to get this dark, and I'm sorry to start off the conversation on such a negative note, but I don't think you have to go as far as the Satmar. I vehemently disagree with Rav Yoel Teitelbaum. He was the Satmar Rebbe who articulated this view that, Zionism was born in sin and so on and so forth. I'm an Orthodox rabbi, but I do not subscribe to that view. I'm a religious Zionist, and I believe that if Israel, we were supposed to try to come back, we did the right thing by coming back. We have the great Zionist pioneers, whether they were religious or not, doesn't really matter. That created this. And if it was a failed experiment, we did our best. We were supposed to come back to Zion, according to the Torah. And the only way to stay there safely is to have a government with an army. So if we did our best, and God forbid it doesn't work out, I mean, I personally don't believe that's the end, God forbid, of world Jewry. We'll go back to it and we'll try it again, like we've been trying for thousands of years. But I want to. This is way too negative. Let me get a little more positive. I want to ask you. You've
Sure.
written seven books, which is pretty unbelievable. One of your books is entitled "The War of Return: How Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream Has Obstructed the Path to Peace." So, in a nutshell, do you believe that? Meaning, has Western indulgence of the Palestinian dream been an obstruction to the path of peace? And do you agree? And forget about the fact that it came about through Donald Trump, because I don't want to get political. But do you believe with Trump's approach, which was to say, look, we can't make peace with the Palestinians. Let's try to make peace with our Sunni Arab neighbors. And the Abraham Accords, were launched. I don't think it was completely because of Donald Trump. There were years and years of development of this before he became president, but he definitely brought it to reality. Do you see the Abraham Accords as the way forward with other Arab nations, and that the Palestinians will eventually follow? And we should stop entertaining this illusion that we could ever have peace with the Palestinians, at least now. Or no, we have to, after Hamas is defeated, after Hezbollah is pushed back, Tehran is hopefully, not going to try this again. And then we have to get back to the drawing board with the Palestinians. What's your feeling about that?
Okay, so basically the short answer to your first question is yes, Western indulgence has been terrible to the prospects of peace. Because if we look historically at who the supporters of the Palestinian cause were, we can declare the uncomfortable truth that no one would have cared about the fate of several hundreds of thousands, now several millions of Arabs living in the Levant, if they had not made their cause a total war against Jewish sovereignty. That's what made them interesting. Otherwise, why would anyone care? So they found that it's actually an asset. Beginning a century ago, they discovered that precisely because they were waging a total war against Jewish sovereignty, and they said so themselves, I'm merely quoting them, they discovered that they had a massive asset, that they could always rely on the support of every anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist, and anti-Jewish power of the moment. So it was the Nazis in the 30s and 40s. It was the Pan-Arabists in the 40s and 50s. It was the Soviets in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And now it's Iran. Now, let's say we lived in a world where everyone knew that those are the supporters of the Palestinian cause of no Jewish state. And unfortunately, there's never been another Palestinian cause. We would have been much clearer about who sits on which side of history. And we would have been much clearer on the understanding that the Palestinian cause has been constructed from the beginning, unfortunately, as a destructive cause against Jewish sovereignty, rather than as a constructive cause designed to live next to the Jewish sovereignty. So things would have been clearer, and people would have known whom we're fighting. But once you had Western countries funding organizations like UNRWA, which essentially is the mechanism by which UN legitimacy and Western money gets funneled to the Palestinian vision of no Jewish state. And those are nice countries. That was America for many years, and it's Australia, and it's the UK. So when you have the letters UN, and when you have Western money constantly flooding into the Palestinian cause of no Jewish state, you are pretty much ensuring that no peace will ever be possible. And again, I'm quoting the Palestinians. The Palestinians view the Western funding of UNRWA as indicating Western support for their vision of no Jewish state. That might not actually be the Western vision, but that's how Palestinians perceive that vision. And that gives them fuel to keep going to fight against the Jewish state. So of course it's been a disaster. It's actually meant that we couldn't make peace because Palestinians were always convinced that they never have to compromise because the world is with them in its opposition to the existence of a Jewish state, even the nice countries of the West.
Have you always been of that opinion that the Palestinian cause is no Jewish state, like even before Oslo?
Of course not. That's the story that I tell in The War of Return. That's the story I tell in many of my talks. Growing up into the Labor Party, the idea of land for peace, the belief that Palestinians only ever wanted an end to the occupation, a state for themselves, that they are a people fighting for freedom, they want the Israeli military goal, that they are essentially a people with limited achievable goals like statehood, like sovereignty, like ending the occupation. And I detail how the collapse of the Camp David negotiations in 2000 with Barak, with Abu Mazen in 2008, the fact that Palestinians in my lifetime, we're not talking 47, within the span of 8 years, faced two concrete opportunities to have a state. And sometimes people say, well, Barak was not strong politically, Olmert was not strong politically. In both cases, it was actually America making the proposals. was the Clinton
Yeah,
parameters.
sure. I remember.
So it was the Bush. I mean, they were behind the proposals. So if people who wanted a state, regardless of whether Israel was, I mean, Israel's a democracy. There's always governments. But if America makes the proposal and guarantees it, a Palestinian people who would have wanted a state would have said yes. And not only did they walk away, not only was there no dissenting voices against them walking away, they followed it up with violence. And I tell the story of how I began to question and research what Palestinians really want, meeting Palestinians only to discover that they've always told us that their goal is no Jewish state. We just didn't listen, or when we listened, we didn't take them seriously.
But someone like Yitzhak Rabin of blessed memory, who was so devoted to Oslo and so devoted to, this proposition of land for peace. I remember in high school and in college, in the early 90s, are you saying we were just duped? We should have seen the writing on the wall, because it's amazing the way you just, from a historical perspective, spoke about the Arab support for the Nazis, and then for, I forgot who you mentioned afterwards. You said the 40s and the 50s.
The Pan-Arabists,
the Pan-Arabists, the Soviets.
Iran.
It's just like the way you described it. It's just like, wow, all this stuff is clicking in my mind right now, of how this has just been one concerted effort to dismantle Israel, not to gain legitimate sovereignty for a people that's stateless. We're just so naive. We've just been so naive all these years.
So two things. First, about Rabin. He was not so enamored with Oslo. By the way, he was on the eve of his assassination. He was already beginning to move away from Oslo. Had he gone head to head with Netanyahu in the 96 elections, not only he was clearly about to lose, he was already on track to disavowing many of the Oslo elements. So he was not so duped, and we see it from protocols in real time. But he was willing to give it a try. And the reason is because you talked about being duped, about being naive, and people now say, how could you be so naive? And I always remind people that Israel is never an island. Israel is never apart from the world. World events shape what's happening in Israel with our own local flavor, but we're part of the world. So I remind people what the 90s were like. Things that were impossible the day before became inevitable the day later, right? The Soviet Union just collapsed. The countries of Eastern Europe became free. Apartheid in South Africa came to an end. Northern Ireland signed the Good Friday Agreement. There was a name for that decade, the end of history. People
I remember.
really
it was a
felt
very, very, very exciting time. I know.
Yeah, it was this euphoric time. We're taking care of business. The world is moving to a sunnier place of the rule of law. America will enforce the rule of law globally. And we could believe in that global atmosphere that our little corner of the world would also be finally, putting history behind, and we can move forward. So we were not different in that decade. It's not that we were personally duped, but and I think it was actually at least important that we gave it a real try. We had a thesis. The thesis was Palestinians are putting behind their decades-long war against Zionism. They're willing to live next to a Jewish state rather than instead of it. They understand that the world is moving forward. They understand that Israel cannot be defeated by force. The world is changing. So there was a thesis. The thesis said, if the Palestinians will get a real opportunity for a state in the West Bank and Gaza, with capital in East Jerusalem and those settlements, that would end the conflict. And both Barak and Olmert empirically tested that thesis. It's actually important that it was empirically tested, only to discover that that was not the problem. So to kind of take what you said about Donald Trump,
before you get to Donald, is it okay? But I really want to hear what you have to say about the Abraham Accords. I have to tell you, I remember being in college. I went to Yeshiva University, very pro-Israel, place. And I don't know if you heard, their enrollment is like doubling now because of what's happening at other universities. So,
Yep.
and I just remember I had friends that were a little more to the right. I always, within the Orthodox world, I always shifted a little more to the left. And I had rabbis that were against Oslo and rabbis that were very pro-Oslo. And the rabbis that were very against were accusing the rabbis that were pro. And basically, some of the pro-Oslo rabbis were, we have to give it a chance. Just like you said, they were looking at other events going on in the world, just what you said. And they were like, listen, we're in the United States. We have to support Israel. And this is what Israel is choosing to do. That's it. And that was really my ideology. We're just going to support Israel's policies like AIPAC tries to do, not to, push their own agenda, but just. And then I had these friends that were more to the right, and they were like, "You guys are being so naive. The rabbis are being naive. The rabbin is being like they want to dismantle the state. They're not interested." And I think about those voices now. I thought about it a lot after October 7th, and no one's being disgusting and saying, "I told you so." And on the other hand, I feel like we have to try. We have to try. Rabbi Soloveitchik, who was my mentor for our community, Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, he was divided with some of his rabbinic colleagues that were Zionists, like the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Lubavitcher Rebbe was of the opinion, no land for peace, it's forbidden according to Jewish law. And Rabbi Soloveitchik said, if you could save Jewish lives, then you could hand the kotel back if need be. You had an Orthodox rabbi saying it was okay to give the kotel back, but he says, don't ask me if it's going to result in, if these negotiations are good. I have no idea. I'm not a politician. I'm not a diplomat. I'm a rabbi, and there was that time where like, they just want their own land. They want their own statehood. They want their own sovereignty like Israel has. I don't know. I guess I'm just coming to terms. A lot of us are coming to terms, those of us that were supportive of this, and people are still talking about the two-state solution. So I guess, and I want to come back to how do we then put this to rest? How do we get the rest of the world to see that the Palestinian cause ultimately was for there to be no Jewish state, and that we need to put this two-state solution idea to rest with the Palestinians? Then we'll get to the Abraham Accords afterwards. Is there a way? Because I don't see Israel saying that. I mean, I see Israelis who are just upset about what happened on October 7th, justifiably saying this is the end. We're done. We just have to put an end to Hamas and live. But do you think Israel is going to start, promoting that in general, and not just the Netanyahu government, but other governments that might replace him at some point?
So where I think we've really been delinquent, certainly for quite some time, is actually precisely on not challenging and calling out the Palestinians, because the amazing thing is that on this issue, they never lie. They will lie about Gaza being an open-air prison, and then when that lie is shown to be a lie, they will then say that it was a paradise lost, but then there's a new lie, which is like famine or genocide. I'm like,
Right.
but
Right.
on the issue that their ultimate cause and very sense of identity is wrapped up in the complete negation of a Jewish state, they actually never lie. They use all kinds of terms like rights and justice, but they never lie. So I actually think that we have been delinquent in not using them as our best allies for making our case. And the way to make our case is actually by constantly proposing a state. So I actually think these things work together.
Right.
In my world, we would have an Israeli leader who says morning, afternoon, and night that the day that the Palestinians end their century-long war with Zionism fully and completely, meaning that they want to live next to a Jewish state rather than from the river to the sea. And it has specific implications. They renounce any notion that they are refugees. They renounce any notion that they possess a right to settle inside Israel, what they call the right of return. Those are actually clear, specific indications that they understand that they're going to live next to the Jewish state. When we know that, and we see it throughout Palestinian society, we can guarantee them that they will always meet a people of Israel, an Israeli state that is willing to make peace, but not a minute before. And I think that's what Israel should constantly be doing. So, when Netanyahu said a few months ago, I have made it my life's work or something to prevent a Palestinian state. And when the Biden administration started talking about two states, I tweeted, and not jokingly, that it's not nice to take credit for the one achievement that the Palestinian national movement had. Because the reason there's no Palestinian state is because Palestinians have never wanted a state if that also meant that the Jews will also have a state. So there was actually no Israeli leader, even Netanyahu, as much as he wants to speak to his base, that has prevented a Palestinian state. The only people who have ever prevented the creation of a Palestinian state were the Arabs of the Levant, who never wanted a state for themselves, and they said so if the Jews also have a state. And I think we need to take the fact that they don't lie on this in order to constantly make it clear that that has only ever been the source of the conflict.
Wow.
Basically, the Jews have always agreed to a two-state solution if one of the two states will be Jewish. And the Arabs have always rejected a two-state solution if one of the states is Jewish. So that's what we need to put on the table.
It's so brilliant and so simple and so much the reality. So how do you feel about skirting the whole issue and going around it, sneaking around the Palestinians into the Sunni states like Donald Trump started? I interviewed Michael Oren on this podcast, and he said that if the name Donald Trump wasn't the name associated with the Abraham Accords, then Biden would have continued them and taken them more seriously than he did. And we might have even had a peace treaty ready with Saudi Arabia, and maybe this whole thing could have been who knows? Some of it was speculation. He admitted that. But how do you feel about that approach? Do you feel that what are we going to do? We're doing everything we can with the Palestinians. We don't have anyone really to talk to, even with Abbas and Fatah and the Palestinian Authority. So let's make peace with whomever we can make peace, and maybe the Palestinians will come around. And peace with some neighbors is better than peace with no neighbors. Is that your approach, or you have a different? I'm curious your perspective on this.
So my approach, actually, look at what the Trump administration actually did. And to the extent people are telling me that it's mostly the vision of Jared Kushner, he didn't go around the Palestinians. They took actually some important steps that made a difference. They didn't just ignore them. First of all, they made it clear to them that they're no longer indulging them, right? The subtitle of my book is Western Indulgence. What the Trump administration ended was Western Indulgence. They defunded UNRWA. They made it clear that it's not a viable organization and this perpetual refugeehood cannot continue. They moved the embassy to Jerusalem, made it clear that Jerusalem is Israel's capital. They basically, they defunded some other stuff. They closed down, I think, also their representation offices. They basically began to say, if you're not playing ball, we're not indulging you anymore. That was actually an important message. A lot of people kind of skirt over that as if it was a marginal thing. No, it wasn't. Those were actually the first steps they took. And it's important because I think everything they built was on that. Then they actually worked very hard to put in place an actual peace proposal to the Palestinians. They didn't just say, you don't exist, we don't acknowledge you, sayonara. They said, we're actually putting a proposal. You can have a state. Like they did things. They did things to call them out. So that was an important piece that people tend to kind of ignore. And then in parallel, they explored the possibility of changing, making peace with countries in the Gulf that, as a result of their greater success and vision and modernization, are letting go of the crutch of anti-Zionism, because anti-Zionism, being the new respectable face of anti-Semitism, is always the ideology of losers, essentially the ideology of failed societies, because they need a scapegoat. But if you're no longer a failed society, then you need a scapegoat much less, because you don't need to distract from your failings.
Yeah.
So sometimes I call the Abraham Accords collateral benefit. We're actually not the central story here. They're changing their societies, and that makes it easier for them to come to terms with Israel. So it was actually a much more holistic approach that was being presented, like by Netanyahu and others, the kind of going around them. And people forget that,
although you're saying people forget that the Trump administration, my friend Jason Greenblatt and Jared Kushner, these guys were offering something, but people on the left, even within Israel, argue, that's not a real offer. They weren't giving, positive terms for the Palestinians to really have a viable state. That's what they argued. I don't know if they ignored it. I think they they disparaged it and they said it's not sincere, it's not genuine. If you want a genuine offer to the Palestinians is going to include, I mean, I don't agree with this. I think it's nonsense and I think it's dangerous for Israel, but the right of return, capital in East Jerusalem, and so on and so forth. And since the Trump administration was not offering that, they really were just going around the Palestinians. They were just trying to make themselves look like they care about the Palestinian issue. I mean, I just think that's kind of the way I saw people's reaction to it. But I mean,
that's an easy one to take down. First of all, again, there were genuine offers in 2000 and 2008, and they were not taken.
Right.
And again, there was no Palestinian voice
before Trump was
saying
even in politics.
That we should take them. So true, this offer was worse, but it was also part of sending the message that you do not get to say no, 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 and no, go on murderous campaigns and violence, and the opening position of the next offer will be what you said no to. That was actually also an important message, that we're not every time, that there are consequences.
But there are countries. There are countries like, what was it, Norway? What was the names of the countries that just in Ireland,
Norway, and Spain.
Yeah, they're like, they're rewarding terrorism. That's indulging them. And once you have enough countries to do that, then why not keep along that strategy? Stay with that strategy. It's working. So why abandon it from the, but tell me about your feelings about what should be done in terms of the Abraham Accords. Is the Biden administration, in your opinion, doing some work with these other, it doesn't have to be America, it could be other countries that are moving that process forward. Is the process continuing to move forward? Do you see a peace treaty with Saudi Arabia on the horizon?
All I can say is, first of all, I'll say long before October 7th, again, as much as Biden, I think, really personally loves Israel, believes in Zionism, I think his policy was a disaster. And I wrote about it long before October 7th, because like you mentioned, he reversed everything Trump did, I think, for the juvenile kind of position that it was Trump. And with all due respect, a globe-spanning empire cannot be that juvenile in that foreign policy, especially when it's a good one. Who cares who did it?
I think the word juvenile is so appropriate here. It's so childish and destructive.
Completely. Like, they wouldn't call the Abraham Accords even Abraham Accords for a year. They killed the momentum. They refunded UNRWA. They refund. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible message. And I think in many ways they reaped what they sowed, and, like, again, re-indulging the Palestinians, no consequences for what they said, freezing the momentum of the Abraham Accords, and in many ways trying to pick it up too late when the momentum was like, ugh. So the policy as a policy was a disaster. Right now, and again, that's why I'm not getting the American policy, is the one thing that will really revive the Abraham Accords, America standing in the Middle East, is Israel winning. An actual, clear, unequivocal defeat of Hamas would serve everybody. So it would serve American standing, because the countries of the Abraham Accords are looking at the American waffling now and like, can we trust this country? Not really. And I mean, I think that Biden would have had a much easier time if he had just been John Fetterman. Like, just be unapologetic, be clear about who's on the right side here, what they need to achieve. And I actually genuinely do not get American foreign policy at the moment. The only explanation I have, and it's the only explanation I always ever have, is that America doesn't actually have to do good foreign policy. America is a wealthy continent. Its northern neighbor is Canada. It's separated from the world by 2 oceans. It doesn't really need to be good at foreign policy. It'll always be okay. That's the only explanation I have.
I mean, there's another simpler, very sad explanation, which is just politics. Whether it's true or not.
But it's bad politics. That's why I don't even understand it. It's not going to help you in Michigan. John Fetterman is doing both the right thing and, by the way, good politics. I think he's enjoying like 80% approval rating in a swing state. I mean, like, I actually think
there's perception about
politics.
I think he's got this perception about getting the large Arab constituency that lives in Michigan, getting their vote, and getting young people who don't really vote in general, and getting their, because there's a major, I'm sure you're aware of this, a major gap in the United States that's divided by age about support for Israel right now. Something like a little more than 50% of all 18 to 24-year-olds somehow felt October 7th was justified. And yet 80% of Americans, 80% of people like over that age are all in favor of Israel's campaign against Hamas. So there's a major differential. The only thing I can think about is that Biden is trying to get the young vote and the Muslim vote. So, but I mean, that's not how you make policy. I mean, but unfortunately, that's how American policy is made.
But I think it's also bad politics. I actually think it's also bad politics because
he's doing terribly. He's doing terribly. But are you? Let's just go back to the Abraham Accords. Are you hopeful that it will? I mean, it doesn't only have to be the United States. Are any other countries invested in seeing Israel coming closer together with her Arab neighbors, and Saudi Arabia among them?
Look, ultimately, the country that's most invested in is Israel. One of the reasons that the Jews were never the problem in a 2-state solution is because we are keenly aware of our status as an ethnic, linguistic, national, and religious minority in an Arab and Muslim Middle East, right? The 7th century conquests of the region were a great success, so well done to the Arabs and Muslims. As long as we care about being sovereign in the land of Israel, we are destined or damned, choose your word, to remain a puny, minute, tiny minority in an overwhelming Arab and Muslim Middle East. So we have a very vested interest in ultimately being at peace with the Arab and Muslim world. I mean, we'll be a fortress for as long as needed for our survival, but it's not our preferred mode. We would love to live in peace. We would love to be embraced and accepted, and for the Arabs and Muslims in the region to finally not look at us as white European settler colonial crusaders, which are just, synonyms for foreign, which means they have to eject us, but actually look at us and say, Abraham, we recognize you as people with a history, with a legitimate historical and cultural claim. We recognize Israel as the embodiment of the historic claim of the Jewish people to the land. Of course, that's the ideal. So this is our vested interest ultimately, but we want to do it as respected equals. We don't want to do it at the price of our existence. This is our only real red line. Our only real,
so they can do this themselves. You think? Can Israel and Saudi Arabia make their own peace treaty? They don't need the United States to intermediate. To be a go-between. I guess I got so used to, this coming out of the.
If it helps, it helps. But over time, this is a local interest,
Right.
and
And do you see it happening? Has it happened? Has it picked up steam or gotten less since October 7th? What's the effect of October 7th on the Abraham Accords?
um, again, we can't know it yet. This is why a clear, unequivocal defeat of Hamas will determine a lot. You know, if Hamas is left standing at the end of this, um, they can claim victory. You know, we survived the onslaught of an Israeli military. Israel is facing global condemnations, and then then I think actually the repercussions are dire, because people will be like, okay, so the vision of the disappearance of the Jewish state might be actually very real. Um, so yeah, a clear defeat of Hamas is necessary here. So I think we can't yet determine what will be the impact of October 7th. But in addition, I think what's happening, the long-term prospects are positive, because I think what the UAE, what Saudi is doing, basically the response to the combination of 9/11, the Arab Spring, the disastrous aftermath, and ISIS has been three responses. One was like a military dictatorship, like in Egypt. Basically, we'll have a military dictatorship. This is how we keep the Islamists at bay. The other response is like Qatar. We're going to just bribe everyone around. We're going to ride the tiger of the Islamism, but also bribe the West so that we can survive from every direction. And then you have really the visionary and very courageous leadership of countries like UAE and Saudi that are saying, actually, we need to rethink, reinterpret, redefine what it means to be a Muslim and an Arab in a way that is modern, attractive, successful, so that we can compete, especially for young men, against the vision of ISIS, which people forget was highly attractive. So I think what's happening in the Gulf with these leaders is nothing less than an attempt at the reformation of Islam. I don't think it's just about, skyscrapers. I think they're actually seeking to reinterpret what it means to be an Arab and a Muslim towards something that is successful, confident, modern, tolerant. And that's why I call the Abraham Accords collateral benefit, because once they begin to change who they are, they have less of a need for this pan-Arabist obsession with anti-Zionism and with the destruction of the Jewish state. So assuming those trends will continue, they're real and they hold real promise.
And they have, and in your opinion, your professional opinion, these Sunni countries, well, they're really concerned that if they don't provide this alternative, vision for modern, Islam, their young men are going to get recruited into ISIS and just radicalized.
They do it from the best of things, which is their own interest of survival.
Okay, yeah, but that's how you make a deal. Yeah,
exactly.
Wow. So they have they have just as much of stake in this as Israel does. I mean,
their stake is in the bigger transformation. Absolutely. By the way, I also think that and this is again why defeat of Hamas is necessary, what they've realized, I think, more deeply than ever before on October 7th, is that they cannot afford to allow the Palestinian anti-Zionism to remain so popular in the Arab world. Because again, ultimately, and this is what the Tsarist Russia and the Soviets understood very well. I recently gave a talk to Republican members of Congress, and I told them, you think you defeated the Soviet Union, it might just have you beat. Because even though the Soviet Union has collapsed, it already inserted into the bloodstream of international organizations and the West and academia, where we see it flourishing, the virus that brings down societies. So the Arab world will continue to be a dysfunctional world as long as it makes anti-Zionism its scapegoating crutch. Because when you constantly blame the Zionists for your failures, and you actually never take actions to change anything, to fix anything. So I think that some of the Gulf countries begin to understand that Palestinianism might actually risk their entire project of modernization. Because if Arabs continue to be obsessed with blaming Zionists, then they can't actually move forward and be modern and build a modern society that has a can-do attitude that solves problems. It just gets fixated on the scapegoats and who's to blame.
Yes.
So I think
Wow.
that they are gingerly beginning to understand that they have a stake in recreating a Palestinian identity that is no longer about the destruction of the Jewish state, but is about building something rather than destroying something.
Thank you. Thank you. I just have one last question. Father, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time. For MJE, the organization that I'm privileged to direct, 20s and 30s, we have a lot of students in graduate school. A lot of their siblings are still in college. How do you process the encampments, the university protests, and keeping it connected to the Abraham Accords a little? Qatar continues to, infuse billions of dollars. It's been encouraging that some Jewish philanthropists have pulled out, maybe even some non-Jewish philanthropists have pulled out their donations to Harvard, Princeton, Yale. But with Qatar pumping the billions, I mean, is there any hope for the future that our children will not be indoctrinated with these lies? Because it's like a perfect storm. You have this social justice movement, which always favors the oppressed or the one or the weaker. So Israel's going to lose. And then you're getting a history from TikTok. So people are not appraised of the facts. They don't know about all of those offers of peace that you've mentioned, that you've shared in this podcast. So what is any hope? What do you think needs to change for things to change on campus?
People need to understand what's at stake. What's happening in campus is in many places misinterpreted, or like a bunch of students, they don't understand history, TikTok, they're just looking for some revolutionary zeal. I actually think that what's happening is really, really dangerous because it's much bigger than the students themselves. I've participated for years in like these high profile debates on whether anti-Zionism is the new anti-Semitism. And I've always lost because, you bring the Satmar Jew, I don't think they're Jew, but then JVP Jew. And then the theoretical argument that anti-Zionism is always anti-Semitism crumbles in the face of one exception. So I remember going back from those debates, especially noticing the response of the crowds that had very much this pogrom Eve energy. And I thought, but this is not a theoretical question. We're not splitting hairs on Satmar theology here. There's a practical and urgent question. What happens to flesh and blood Jews when anti-Zionism becomes the dominant ideology of a society, of a country, of a political party, of a campus? And here the historical record is clear. Once anti-Zionism was introduced by the Soviet Union, especially as the respectable replacement for anti-Semitism, everywhere that anti-Zionism became the ruling ideology, within a few short years, the environment turned hostile to Jewish life, even as they were protesting that they have nothing against Jews. They love Jews. Jews are great. They might have been Jews themselves, as they were in the Soviet Union and some of the, in the Arab revolutionary movements, until they were discarded. And when it was not stopped, within a few years, no Jews were left. So this is what happens in the Arab world during the 2 decades when anti-Zionism is the dominant ideology of the Arab world. From Morocco to Afghanistan, no Jews are left. The Soviet Union, again, claimed to not be against Jews. Who knows that they are Jews even? We know how it treated its Jews. Iran, a community of 150,000, reduced to 8,000. Poland in 1968, a little known story about a wave of anti-Zionism that whatever Jews were still left in Poland either left or many committed suicide. You have Venezuela more recently, and you have campuses today. As they claim that they have nothing against Jews, and you have Jews at the forefront of some of it, it actually doesn't matter, because fundamentally they're participating in something that is much bigger than them, which is an ideology that always, but always is translated to ultimately no Jews being there. So I think right now we're on the verge of a major battle that, I mean, will this become the campus ideology? I can assure you, if this becomes the campus ideology and there's no fighting back, then no Jews will be left on those campuses. Will it become the ideology of the Democratic Party? Then we're witnessing on the verge of like a Jeremy Corbyn, right? Jeremy Corbyn was the classic, I'm only an anti-Zionist, I have nothing against Jews. But within minutes of him taking over the Labour Party and being within a very close shot of being Prime Minister of Britain, it became a cesspool against Jews, and Jews in Britain understood that they have to fight back. So I think a lot of people are completely underestimating how big a deal what is brewing on campuses is for the future of Jews on campuses and in America in general.
And do you think that, thank you, do you think that the answer to that, or one of the answers, is to keep Jews on those campuses fighting back, or just pull out and say, you know, I spoke in a hotel over Passover, and I asked one, you know, how do you guys feel about funding, you know, an institution that is clearly anti-Semitic? Its president cannot call out these chants as anti-Semitic chants, as, you know, and a woman came over to me and said, you know, I have two daughters in Yale. I have a son and a daughter in Yale, a senior and a sophomore, and be very upset. I said, listen, you know, all the power to them if they can stay there and fight back. But if they're just going to take the yarmulke off, put the Magen David in, and just, you know, keep quiet, and just no one will know I'm Jewish, and I'll get the best education, because that's what we Jews do well in America. We go undercover and we become successful. And the less noise we make, it's a very different attitude than Sabras and Israelis have. Okay. And I said to her, I don't even know, like, and my friend is the president of Yeshiva University, Rabbi Ari Berman, Dr. Ari Berman. We just honored him at our dinner. And like, is that the answer? Just get everybody off because they're going to bed? Or we should train a cadre of pro-Israel Zionists to push back, and push back hard. And it's got to be the students. I just had a student from Columbia, Daniela Simons. She served in the IDF. Very impressive young woman. She just finished her freshman year at Columbia. She's a named plaintiff in one of the lawsuits. That, you know, there are 4 or 5 different lawsuits being filed against the university now for failing to protect its Jewish students. Is that the approach that we should be doing? And to make the question a little more difficult, does it matter if Qatar just keeps pumping billions of dollars into those places?
So my answer would be the following. If to fight, then fight back all the way. Not really, it's actually not on the students. The students, I mean, there's only so much they can do. This has to be an all-out, including legal fight, to make sure that universities cannot get, for example, money from foreign powers at all. For example, I mean, there has to be legislative battles. It has to be all-out battles about, you know, faculty structures, ideologies, because that's what at stake. At stake is the ability of Jews to be Jews on American campuses. Again, if we're not talking about the broader issue of the Democratic Party, because as I said, if this is not fought against, it always ends with no Jews being left. Yeah. That's it. Like, there's actually no counter example where this ideology flourishes and somehow it turns out well for Jews. It doesn't exist. And there's no amount of hiding that will ever be enough, because we're already seeing it. Jews could, you know, there was a time where Jews could say, I'm not interested in Israel, and that was enough. No, now you have to profess your visceral anti-Zionism to be considered a good enough Jew. And even that, there's always, a moving of the goalposts. You constantly have to prove yourself. You'll always be found out. So either it's an all-out battle to ensure that this ideology is ejected from the universities, or an organized exodus so that these universities will collapse into irrelevance, or at least into second, third grade status, and build something else. But
Yeah, but can they? That's the question. If we all pull out, because I was advocating that originally, and I had somebody who came to MGE, a woman, um, a very, very impressive young woman who's also who's suing NYU now.
Mhm.
And she said, if we leave, then it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. They're getting funding from, but I said, I went to Columbia and I graduated in 1993. Edward Said, if you remember him, was there. He was the head of the literature department at the time. And I said, I don't know, it's been 25 plus years since I graduated. Things have not gotten better. So maybe we should all leave. But I know it's not like we fought back. It's like when you get into a fight in the playground and you either fight back hard or don't fight at all.
Precisely.
And I think we've been a little wussy.
Oh, for sure. And the wussiness, by the way, came from a reluctance to appreciate what is really at stake.
I think it's a little more of a diaspora mentality, I think, of wanting to fit in, be loved, and just get through school so I can get the good degree from the good university and get the job I'm interested in and not ruffle any feathers.
I'll
And I
tell you
think
why I don't think it's only that, because you talked about American Jews keeping their head down. British Jews historically are even more like barely anybody knows they're Jews.
right.
And
Right.
they always look at the Americans as being these garish, like, Jews who do lobbying and all that.
Yeah.
But British Jews who nobody thought would fight back, when they understood that their very ability to be Jews in Britain was at stake, a lot of Jewish figures came out of the woodwork. People who did not previously identify clearly as Jewish, people knew, but it wasn't out there. They fought back, and they fought to defeat Jeremy Corbyn, to make it clear
Right.
that there's a political price to pay. Right now, the only ones that are really conducting the kind of battle that needs to take place are AIPAC, where they've
Yeah.
actually made it clear that they will exact a political price from people who seek to go to Congress with a clear agenda of destroying the U.S. support for Israel. We are beyond any halfway measures.
I would love to know who to speak to. It's probably a federal issue about getting, a ban on foreign aid to universities. Because if we didn't have that, then just the Jewish money alone that's flowing into these universities would really make a difference. But you should just know that here in the United States, that's kind of the discussion that's going on.
Oh, I'm very much aware of it.
Yeah, you know. Let me ask you one last question. You've written 7 books and they're amazing. Your articles, I'm a huge fan of yours. And what is a good first book if someone is listening to this and they want to start reading and following you? Obviously, we'll give everybody your information to follow you on Instagram and the like. But someone who's in their 20s and 30s listening to this, or whatever age, and they want to, what's a good start to hear more of your wisdom?
Thank you. So I can say that the one comment that I always get on the War of Return is that if there's one book you're going to read about the conflict, this is it. So I would tell people to start with the War of Return. If you want more about Jewish issues and Zionism, then my most recent collection of essays, We Should All Be Zionists, has basically a lot of my recent thinking. And if you want things that are up to date, then I'm most active on Twitter and Instagram. We Should All Be Zionists is also book reading with a podcast where every time I read an essay and I discuss it with Blake Flayton. Those would be the places to start.
Wow, thank you. All right, so guys, if everyone who's listening, The War of Return, How Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream Has Obstructed the Path to Peace, and the series of articles, We Are All Zionists.
We should all be Zionists.
We should all be Zionists also. Thank you so much for your time. And I just wish you just continued success. Hashem should bless you with much more success. You should get your voice out there, and your ideas so incredibly important. There were so many insights, just the Palestinian cause of no Jewish state, that whole just historical perspective. It just puts so much of the reality into perspective. We're coming to Israel, MJE. We're bringing a group, 2 volunteer groups at the end of July. If you have any suggestions for us as to where to go, we're doing it together with Birthright. We bring groups every summer. Just want to end on a positive note, and thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.